and welcome to Daily News Simplified, the why, what, and how of newspaper reading. Today we will discuss the articles displayed on the screen from the Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper dated 23rd October 2018, and the timestamping for the same has been provided in the description box below. So let us start our discussion for the day. Now, in continuation with our series of discussion of the questions that were asked in the Civil Services Mains Examination of 2018, today we will take a question that was asked in the General Studies Paper 1. Now, the question number 5 that was asked in the General Studies Paper 1 was related to India's interest in the resources of Arctic region. Now, this question was a part of the geography of our syllabus of Paper 1, and in this it was part of the subtopic resources. And you should know that it was a major current affairs in the month of July because a news appeared in the Hindu newspaper. Now, the question which appeared in the exam was related to this news article, which reads India to expand polar research to Arctic as well. And this was covered in the Daily News Simplified of 20th July 2018. Now, an important point that should be noted is that in year 2015, UPSC asked a question in the preliminary examination. And this question read, the term Ind Arc sometimes seen in the news is related to. So the correct answer in this case was D, that is India's underwater observatory to scientifically study the Arctic region. So this gives us an idea that the questions which appear in the preliminary examination give us a clue about the important events which are related to India and questions based on which can be asked in the mains examination. So you can see that in the year 2018 in the paper 1, a question was asked related to India's interest in the resources of Arctic region. Now the question read, why is India taking keen interest in the resources of Arctic? Now this question has been asked in the 10 markers, and it required us to write 150 words on this question. So a simple answer structure for this question could have been the introduction, which talks about the impact of climate change and the polar ice melting in Arctic. Secondly, you could have discussed how this melting of ice opens up new opportunities for India. Thirdly, you could have talked about India's presence in the Arctic region. For example, a project named Ind Arc is currently running in the Arctic region. And thirdly, you should draw a map related to the presence of India in the Arctic region, because it is a question related to geography and maps will help you in fetching good marks as compared to others. Now let us have a look at the coverage of India's interest in the Arctic region in the DNS and the Focus magazine. And let us try to bring out some important points which could have been easily used to answer this question. Now in the Daily News Simplified of 20th July 2018, we covered it under why is India refocusing on Arctic. So the points that were covered in this article and which can be used in answering this question are that climate change is a decisive factor in India's rethinking of priorities. Secondly, sea ice at the Arctic has been melting rapidly and this has been the fastest in this century. And this means that several spots which are rich in hydrocarbon reserves, fossil fuels will be more accessible throughout the year via alternative shipping routes. So these are the 2 points in this single point. First is that it will open up new areas for fossil fuels. We know that India is an oil importing nation, and new areas which provide us oil security are important for us. And secondly, it will open up alternative shipping routes. Now we know that India has been importing majority of its oil from the Middle Eastern countries, mainly Iraq, Iran, Saudi Arabia, etc. However, the finding of hydrocarbons due to melting in the Arctic region will provide India with new resources. And we all know that India has been working on the international north-south transport corridor. So this north-south transport corridor will further give a boost to the access towards the resources of Arctic region. Now fourthly, India is also worried about the impact of melting of ice on the monsoon. So it has been felt that India needs more observations and stations in the Arctic countries to improve the understanding of the impact of melting of ice on the monsoon. So these are some of the reasons why India has keen interest in the resources of Arctic region. Now you could have also written some facts related to status of India's presence in the Arctic region. So in this line, India is already an observer member of the Arctic Council. India has set up an underground observatory called Ind Arc. And you should know that this aspect was asked in the 2015 prelims examination. Thirdly, Indian Arctic Station in Himadri is located at the Ellison-Spitsbergen Island, and it serves as a hub of Indian scientific investigation. So this also gives us another point that India is also interested in the scientific investigations in this region. Now the issue related to India's interest in the Arctic region has also been covered in the August edition of Focus magazine. And in this, the topic was India's focus on Arctic. And you can see that it shows a map which is related to India's presence in the Arctic. So this point could have been used in answering this question. So this article provides us some key important points which are related to India's interest in the Arctic region. And these points have also been discussed in the Daily News Simplified. So in answering this question, you could have used the points that were mentioned in the DNS and the focus. You could have also drawn a map or two, and you should have thrown light on the India's presence in the Arctic region. And as we know that this was a 10 marker question, so not many points were required to answer this question. Now let us start our discussion of the newspaper. This picture on page number 18, that is the last page of the newspaper, talks about the Tadobha Andhari Tiger Reserve in Maharashtra. So this will form part of the preliminary examination syllabus under the topic Indian Geography as well as issues related to biodiversity. So we will try to look at some of the key features of the Tadobha Andhari Tiger Reserve. Now you should note that questions based on national park have been asked in the previous years. For example, questions were asked in the year 2013, 14 and 15. So at the end of this discussion, we will also try to answer these questions. Now regarding the location of Tadobha Andhari, you should notice that it is located in the state of Maharashtra. And the location of the same can be seen on the map of India here. And in the state of Maharashtra, the location is in eastern side of Maharashtra. Further, it is the oldest and the largest national park of Maharashtra. Now regarding the name of this national park, Tadobha is taken from the name of god Tadobha or the Taru. And Taru is worshipped by the tribes who live in the dense forests of Tadobha and Andhari region. However, Andhari refers to a river named Andhari River that passes through this forest. Now, Tadobha Reserve is predominantly southern tropical dry deciduous forest. So this is another important point that should be noted. And teak is the predominant species of this forest. So the three important points that emerge are that it is located in the state of Maharashtra. The predominant forest type is the tropical dry deciduous forest. And the predominant tree species is the teak. And you should notice that it is also a national park. So Tadobha Andhari is both a tiger reserve as well as a national park. Now let us have a look at the questions that were asked in the previous years. In the year 2013, the question required us to identify the rivers which pass through the national parks. And the options given were that Corbett National Park in Ganga, Kaziranga National Park in Manas, and Silent Valley National Park in Kaveri. So the question asks which of the above pairs is or are correctly matched. However, all the three were wrongly matched and the correct answer in this case was D, that is none. Because through Corbett National Park, the river Ram Ganga passes. Through Kaziranga National Park, the river Brahmaputra passes. And Kaveri does not pass through the Silent Valley National Park. So the important rivers that pass through the national parks are important for us from prelims point of view. Regarding the question that was asked in 2014, it required us to identify the location of famous tiger reserves or wildlife sanctuary. So the first option was Dampa Tiger Reserve and Mizoram. This is correctly matched. The second is Gumti Wildlife Sanctuary and Sikkim. Now this is wrongly matched because Gumti Wildlife Sanctuary is in Tripura. And regarding the Saramati Peak, it is located in Nagaland. So the correct answer in this case was C, 1 and 3 only. Another question that was asked in 2015 read, which of the following national parks is unique in being a swamp with floating vegetation that supports a rich biodiversity? The correct answer in this case was Kibul Lamjau National Park. And you should know that it is famous for a type of deer which is called as Sangai or the dancing deer. And this deer is known as bro-antlered deer. Now another question that was asked in 2015 was, in India, in which one of the following types of forest is teak a dominant species? Now we have recently noticed that teak is a dominant species in the Tadobha Andhari National Park or the Tiger Reserve. So if you look at the options, deciduous forest is absent in B, C and D. So the most appropriate answer comes out to be tropical moist deciduous forest. So these are some of the questions that were based on national parks in the previous years. With this, let us move on to the next article. This news article on page number 1 is related to the increasing pollution in the Sagar Island due to the increased number of pilgrims reaching there. And due to the increased pollution, the scientists have warned that the increasing pollution is creating conditions for the outbreak of waterborne diseases in the Sagar Island. Now, this news article will form a part of the preliminary examination syllabus under the topic Indian Geography. This is because we will only go through the location of the Sagar Island from our prelims point of view. So, regarding the Sagar Island, you should know that it is an island in the delta of the Ganga River and it lies in the Bay of Bengal at the mouth of the Ganga Delta. So the location of the Sagar Island is important for us from the preliminary examination point of view. And you should also note that it lies to the south of Kolkata. Further, this island is also known as Ganga Sagar or Sagar Dweep because it is a place of Hindu pilgrimage. So primarily in this article, what is important for us from exam point of view is the location of Sagar Island. Now let us move on to the next article. This article on page number 8 is related to the adverse impact of increasing population of purple urchin, and it has impacted the marine underground forests along the coast of California. So this will form a part of the preliminary examination syllabus under the topic Issues on Biodiversity. So let us try to understand some of the key forests and terminologies that have been mentioned in this article. Now the news article highlights that the number of purple urchins, which is a marine animal, has increased 60 folds as a result of climate change. So this means that there has been a population explosion of purple urchins because of the climate change. And these urchins have destroyed seaweeds and the kelp or the kelp forests in the oceans near the Californian coast. And you should know that urchins, which are marine animals, are prominent species of the kelp forests. So let us try to understand the reason for the increasing number of purple urchins and what is meant by the term kelp forests. Now the reason for the increasing number of purple urchins is that there has been a large number of death of the starfishes. And you should know that in a food chain, the starfish normally feeds on urchins. And due to the death of starfish, which is a predator species for the urchins, the population of urchins has increased considerably along the Californian coast. And the death of starfishes has been linked to warming of oceans or the marine heat waves. So the reason for the death of starfishes is the warming of oceans due to climate change and the marine heat waves. And due to the death of starfishes, which is a natural predator for urchins, the population of urchins has increased considerably. Now these urchins or the purple urchins feed on the seaweeds or the kelp forests. And due to the increased number of urchins, which normally feed on seaweeds, the underground forests or the kelp forests along the Californian coast have come under threat. Now regarding the kelp forests, you should notice that kelps are underwater forests and are large brown algae seaweeds. And this can be seen in the picture here that these are large brown algae seaweeds. So this is an important fact and should be kept in mind. Now like normal trees, these kelp forests or the underground forests absorb carbon emissions and they provide critical habitat and food for a wide range of species. So these forests are important for the marine ecosystem. Further, the kelp forests exist along the cooler coastlines of every continent, and this can be seen in the map of the world here that kelp forests are present on the sides of continent where the cold water currents are present. For example, along the South American coast, the kelp forests are present where the Peruvian cold current passes. And similarly, other locations of kelp forests coincide with the cold waters in the oceans, and these are related to the cold currents. However, one unique fact is that they are not present in the continent of Antarctica. And this can be seen in the map here that kelp forests are not present in the Antarctic continent. Now, these kelp forests are under threat from rising ocean temperatures and warmer waters. So, these forests are being impacted due to the global warming and the climate change and the increasing ocean temperatures. So, these are some of the key facts related to kelp forests which should be kept in mind from your preliminary examination point of view. With this, let us move on to the next article. This article on page number 13 states that the direct tax base has widened sharply in last 4 years. And the article further observed that there has been continuous improvement in the amount of income declared. So this will form a part of the preliminary examination syllabus under the topic Economic Development. And it will also form a part of the General Studies Mains examination under the paper 3 under topic Indian Economy. Now, if you look at the data that has been provided in this article, it provides a trend of the tax to GDP ratio. Further, it also provides a trend of the direct tax collection. And such trends become very important for us from exam point of view. Now, these trends are important because previously questions have been asked based on such trends. For example, this question was asked in the year 2017, and this question provided two statements which were related to certain trends related to tax to GDP ratio and the fiscal deficit. Further, a question was directly asked related to the concept of tax to GDP ratio in the year 2015. So after going through this article, we will try to understand the importance of tax to GDP ratio and also try to answer these questions. Now, according to the recently released data by the government, the direct tax base has significantly widened in the last few years. The data shows a growth of more than 80% in the numbers of income tax returns filed in the last 4 financial years. And the number has increased from 3.79 crores in 2013-14 to 6.85 crores in 2017-18. Further, the data shows that the number of persons filing income tax returns has also increased by about 65% during this period. And it has increased from 3.31 crores in 2013-14 to 5.44 crores in 2017-18. Now, as the article provides that the tax to GDP ratio has also increased, let us try to understand the concept of tax to GDP ratio. Now, simply the tax to GDP ratio shows the tax revenue of a country measured in terms of GDP. That is, tax collection as a ratio of the gross domestic product of a country. Now, for example, if the tax to GDP ratio is 10%, this means that the government gets 10% of the GDP as tax distribution from public and the corporate entities. Now, the increased tax to GDP ratio shows that the government has the ability to spend on socio-economic development. This is because if the tax to GDP ratio is higher, the government will have more earnings in terms of taxes. And if the government has more earnings or more income in terms of taxes, it can spend more on the socio-economic developmental needs of the country. Now, the present data shows that the direct tax to GDP ratio has risen to 5.98% in the financial year 2017 and 18. And it is the highest in past 10 years. Further, you should know that higher GDP will automatically lead to higher tax collection. Now, if the GDP increases, the tax collection will also increase. And due to this, the tax to GDP ratio will also improve. And we know that GDP shows the overall development in the country, and an increase in GDP will also lead to a higher per capita income. So these are some of the facts related to the tax to GDP ratio. Now let us look at the question that was asked in the year 2015. The question read, a decrease in tax to GDP ratio of a country indicates which of the following? The first statement says it reflects the slowing economic growth rate, and which is correct. And we have recently read that increase in GDP will lead to increased tax collection. And if the GDP decreases, the tax collection will also decrease. And hence the tax GDP ratio will decrease. Now, as the tax to GDP ratio is decreasing, it will reflect the slowing economic growth rate. The second statement says that it reflects the less equitable distribution of national income. Now, this statement is incorrect because the tax to GDP ratio does not tell anything about the inequality or distribution of the national income. So, the correct answer that was provided by the UPSC answer key is A, that is 1 only. Now, the question that was asked in 2017 reads, consider the following statements. The first statement reads that tax revenue as a percent of GDP or the tax to GDP ratio has steadily increased in the last decade. Now, this statement was incorrect. And secondly, the fiscal deficit as a percentage of GDP of India has steadily increased in the last decade. This statement was also incorrect because the fiscal deficit had spiked in the year 2013 to 14. However, the fiscal deficit started declining after 2014 because of decrease in the international prices of oil. So this statement was also incorrect. So correct answer in this case was D, that is neither 1 nor 2. Now regarding the first statement, you can see that the data has been provided in this figure in the news article. And this shows the trend of tax to GDP ratio. Now as the question was asked in 2017 and you look at this figure, the tax to GDP has not steadily increased but it has fluctuated. For example, it was 5.81 in 2010-11 and it has decreased to 5.48 in 2011-12. It further increased in 2012-13 to 5.53. So this shows a fluctuation in the tax to GDP ratio, which means that it has not steadily increased in the last decade. So this statement was incorrect. So that is why such trends are important to learn from preliminary examination point of view. With this, let us move on to the next article. This article on page number 7 is related to a study that has been conducted by Center for Science and Environment. It talks about the pollution that is caused by the waste from the toilets in the rivers and the farmlands. So this will form a part of the General Studies paper 3 under the topic Environment. So let us try to look at some of the important points that have been highlighted by this study. Now, a study conducted by the Center for Science and Environment on the disposal of fecal sludge has found that most of the fecal sludge is ending up into our farmlands, rivers and water bodies without being treated at the waste treatment plants. Now regarding the fecal sludge, you should know that it is composed of human excreta, water and other solid wastes. Now the study has found that Uttar Pradesh has an 80% coverage of toilets. However, due to inefficient sanitation systems, almost 80% of the excreta that is being generated by these toilets is being dumped in the water bodies or agricultural lands. So due to the inefficient sanitation systems, most of the waste that is generated by the toilets end up in river bodies and agricultural lands. Further, the study highlights that number of toilets which are being built across India, both in urban and rural areas, need to be managed scientifically and sustainably. The study further says that if the fecal sludge or the fecal waste is not managed scientifically or sustainably, it will end up polluting our rivers and farmlands. The study further notes that building more toilets will only worsen the environment, sanitation, and the manual scavenging situation. So the report highlights that because of inefficient sanitation systems and lack of scientific and sustainable management of fecal waste, most of the fecal waste ends up polluting our rivers and farmlands. The study further finds that on-site sanitation systems such as septic tanks and pit latrines are far more prevalent. So the study says that cleaning such septic tanks and pit latrines become very important and necessary. However, the study has found that these tanks are being emptied manually by employing manual scavengers. And you should know that manual scavenging is legally prohibited. Further, the study finds that there is no open site for the disposal of these sludge. And most of this sludge and waste ends up in open drains, nalas, and open fields. And eventually, this waste from the drains, nalas, and open fields ends up in rivers like Ganga and other surface water bodies. So the study has highlighted the flow of waste from household to the rivers and the water bodies and the way they are causing more pollution in these rivers. The study has also given an analysis based on the population of cities, and under this it has found that the situation is worse in smaller cities. Now regarding the smaller cities, the study says that more than 70% of the population is dependent on septic tanks, which are connected to open drains. However, the study says that roughly half of them qualify to be septic tanks. Now, regarding these tanks, the study finds that there is absence of scheduled desludging, and only 30% of the sludge generated gets emptied. However, rest of it remains in the tank and reduces the tank's treatment efficiency. And you should know that septic tanks decompose fecal matter by the use of bacterial activity. However, due to absence of scheduled desludging, only 30% of the sludge generated gets emptied, and due to this, the efficiency of the septic tanks in decomposing the fecal matter is reduced. Another issue that is highlighted is that due to inaccessible septic tanks, manual scavenging is rampant in such areas. Now, if you look at the question paper of General Studies paper 3 of the mains examination of 2018, you will find a question related to the solid waste management. So similarly, a question can be asked on lack of proper sewage management and the related pollution that it causes in the rivers and farmlands of our country. So the points mentioned in this article can be used to write such answers. With this, let us move on to the next article. This editorial on page number 8 highlights the tussle that is going on between the government and the RBI relating to the formation of an independent payments regulator board. Now this will form a part of the General Studies paper 3 of the mains examination syllabus. Now the context in which this editorial appears is that an interministerial committee has proposed an independent payments regulatory board. And you should know that earlier the payment system was regulated by the RBI. Now the payment systems means the various mode of payments that are available presently. For example, the major ones are the NEFT, RTGS, debit card, credit card, etc. So all these are part of the payment systems. So presently these payment systems are regulated under RBI. However, an interministerial committee has proposed to create an independent payments regulatory board to have an oversight above all these payment systems. And it wants to take this power away from the RBI. So in this case, the RBI has raised certain concerns. So under this editorial, we will try to understand all the concerns that have been raised by the RBI. And we will also understand the highlights of this editorial regarding the issue that is going on. Now, as the Interministerial Committee has proposed an independent payments regulatory board, the RBI has recently presented or released a dissent note against this decision of the Interministerial Committee. And this tussle between the RBI and the government has been termed as a turf war by this editorial. Now, the background of the payment systems is that the Payment and Settlement Act 2007 provided for powers to the Reserve Bank of India to constitute a board and to regulate the payment sector. And it provided the legal basis for the basic features of a payment system framework. So to regulate all kinds of payment systems, for example, the NEFT, RTGS, debit card, credit card, etc., The Payments and Settlements Act 2007 provided the power to RBI, and under this, the RBI could constitute a board to regulate such payment systems. However, recently an interministerial committee has recommended for setting up of Payments Regulatory Board as an independent payments regulator which will not be under RBI. So this is the issue that is going on. So now let us understand what are the concerns that have been raised by the RBI in this context. Now RBI in its dissenting note has said that the Payments Regulatory Board should be within the RBI, and the chairperson of such Payments Regulatory Board should be from RBI, and he should have the power of a casting vote. And regarding the casting vote, you should understand that in case of a tie, the chairperson of the Payments Regulatory Board can vote on either side of the decision, and by this a decision can be arrived at in case of a tie. Now the RBI has further argued that the payment banks or the payment systems come within the traditional banking system only, and we know that RBI regulates the banking system in our country, and it is against the separation of payment systems from the regular or the traditional banking system. So due to this, the RBI says that it makes better sense to have RBI oversee the activities of payment systems or the banks instead of creating a new regulator. And regarding this, the RBI says that regulation of banking system and the payment systems by a same regulator provides the synergy or coordination between the two. And in case of separation or creation of independent payments regulatory board, there will be issue of synergy or coordination between the two. So simply the RBI is pointing towards the interconnections or interdependency between the payments industry and the banking system. And you should also note that the Wattal committee had recommended the establishment of Payments Regulatory Board within the overall structure of RBI. This means that it was also against the creation of Independent Payment Regulatory Board. Now to address some of the concerns which have been raised by the RBI, the Interministerial Committee has proposed certain changes. And in this regard, the committee proposes that the Payments Regulatory Board should make reference to the RBI before making any regulation for the designated payment system. So by making a reference to the RBI in case of regulation of any payment system, the coordination between the two bodies would increase. Further, the committee proposes that if RBI considers any matter which is important from the monetary policy point of view, it can refer this matter to the Payments Regulatory Board. So by this power, the issue of RBI's power of regulation of banks can be addressed. So by proposing the changes, the Interministerial Committee has sought to address the concerns which were raised by the RBI. Now let us look at the points that have been highlighted by this editorial in this regard. Now the editorial says that there is definite overlapping between the current regulatory powers of RBI and the proposed regulations for the payments industry. So simply it says that there is overlapping of the issues related to the payment system and the banking system. So the editorial further states that a unified payments regulator can help in lowering compliance costs and enabling seamless implementation of rules. It is because if RBI regulates both the activities, there will be no issue of coordination. However, if an independent payments regulatory board is established, there will be issue of coordination and the implementation of rules will become more difficult. Further, the editorial says that there is real risk that a new brand regulator may be unable to match the expertise of the RBI. So the editorial says that the RBI already has expertise in regulating the payment systems and there is no need of creating a new or independent payments regulatory board. However, while concluding, the editorial says that the centralization of regulatory powers in RBI should be matched with a greater degree of responsibility. So simply the editorial says that if the RBI has control over the payments regulatory system, it should carry out its functions with responsibility. Now with this, let us move on to the next article. This article on page number 14 states that a government appointed panel has recommended that India should adopt United Nations model on cross border insolvency. And this is because the model forms a part of the international best practices in dealing with the issues of insolvency and bankruptcy. And we know that Indian economy has been facing issues of non-performing assets and bad loans. And in this context, the government had come up with the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code of 2016. So the panel has recommended that India should adopt the United Nations model on cross-border insolvency that should be integrated with the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code 2016. So this will form a part of the General Studies paper 3 of the mains examination. Now let us try to understand some of the key facts related to this article and the rationale for introduction of United Nations model on cross-border insolvency. Now, the article is in news because a government appointed panel has recommended that India should adopt the UN Citral's model law of cross border insolvency. And UN Citral is the United Nations Commission on International Trade Law. And the government wants to introduce this model law for cross border insolvency framework. Now, regarding the UN Citral's model law, let us understand that it was created to assist nations in relation to regulation of corporate insolvency and financial distress, which involved companies which have assets or creditors in more than one country. So basically, it was related to the insolvency and financial distress related issues for those companies which have stake in more than one country. And presently, you should know that this model law has been adopted in 44 countries, and it forms a part of international best practices in dealing with cross border insolvency issues. Now, you should note that the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code of 2016 has been facing issues in solving the problems of those corporates or companies which have presence in more than one country. So, now let us try to understand the rationale or the reason or the logic behind introducing such a model law. Now, first of all, let us understand why is a cross-border insolvency framework required under the IBC or the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code 2016. Now, the need for introduction of such a cross-border insolvency framework is that many Indian companies have a global footprint and many foreign companies have a presence in multiple countries including India. So, for those companies which have global affairs and which are facing issues of insolvency and financial distress, a cross-border insolvency framework was required. Now, advantage of having such a model law is that it gives precedence to the domestic proceedings, and secondly, it provides for the protection of public interest. So, both these things will be taken care of with such a model law. Now, there are further more advantages of introducing such a model law, and these include greater confidence generation among foreign investors, adequate flexibility for seamless integration with domestic insolvency law. For example, there will be integration of the cross-border insolvency framework with that of the IBC 2016. And it will also provide a robust mechanism for international cooperation. Another rationale or logic for introducing such a model law is that it will be a major step forward in bringing Indian insolvency law at par with that of other matured jurisdictions. So these are some of the points which have been highlighted by the government panel for introducing a cross-border insolvency framework from the UN Citral or United Nations body on international trade. With this, we have come to the end of today's discussion. Now let us move on to the question for the day.